mental illness actually comes from a vulnerability, and that vulnerability comes from not being connected in the right way to ourselves, to God, to other people. The more disconnect we experience is the greater our propensity to mental illness. And that's why we see so much mental illness in the world today. It is increasing because we're talking about it more, like it's becoming more commonly known. But I think it's also increasing as a phenomenon, and that is due in large part to the fact that communities are breaking down. That has to do with immigration, but it also has to do with the increased use of the cell phone and social media. So a recent study came out in the United States that showed that since the introduction of the iPhone amongst youth, amongst teenagers, I think it was around age 12, that depression has increased in that population significantly. And so why does that happen? Because we're on our cell phones and we're disconnected from the people around us. Now, when we're on our cell phones and disconnected, what happens is we don't learn how to have healthy relationships. And when young children are learning that at a very young age, that, I can go to my phone and I don't need to be connected to the people in the room, then the skills to speak to those people, to deal with conflict, to deal with disappointment, failure, and all of that, we're losing those skills. So as they grow and they enter the workforce, they enter relationships, they enter marriage, they're not able to deal with real relationships. And that relationship breakdown over time causes depression inevitably. The greater concern I have with social media is that what it does is it feeds on our external self-concept. Each of us has a self-concept, and I distinguish between an internal self-concept and an external or externalized self-concept. The internal self-concept is our real values and beliefs about ourselves. And ideally, this should be strong, and it's one of those sources of security that allows us to be resilient in the world and decreases our chances of depression. What happens when we introduce social media into the mix is that we end up externalizing our self-concept. We base who we are and what we believe about ourselves on the opinions of not just our family members, not just our community, but hundreds and sometimes thousands of other people who we constantly see on social media. And not only that, but we receive feedback from them in the form of likes. So likes, although they seem very small, have had a profound effect on the human psyche, in that what we constantly do is we seek those likes. We seek that approval. We seek comments in our threads about what we're doing and how we're doing it. We see what other people are doing all the time. Now our news is no longer just the news about the people who are, big, but our neighbors. And all we see is the good things and the beautiful things that they're doing. So our self-concept is affected by this constant feedback, and the feedback doesn't help. If the feedback was more realistic, like you saw people in their real lives and what was really happening to them, and if the feedback was more to do with who we are as individuals versus whether people like how we look or like what we do, then we'd feel more whole. But what ends up happening is that feedback doesn't feed our self-concept. It challenges our self-concept. It makes us weak. And we have generations growing up now who are into that social media and receiving that feedback, and that's where they base their sense of self. So when your sense of self is in this world, this online world, then you don't really have a very strong internal sense of self, right? And then your propensity for depression is much higher.